This time we've got a very exciting session today. We've got a panel discussion about how to unlock the investment that cybersecurity means. So rather than it just being Turnkey talking at you for the next 45 minutes or so, we've actually got some of our clients who are very experienced in this space. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing you to who we've got as our panelists. Hopefully the screen will move on and everything will go well, and you should see who we've got in front of us. So, as I mentioned, I'm Simon Persson, the Director of Operations for Turnkey, but it's not about me today. So I'd like to introduce you first of all to Paul Edney and then to Punit. So Paul, if you wouldn't mind giving yourself a quick introduction and then we can move on through.
No problem. Thanks, Simon. So my name's Paul Edney. I look after, I'm Head of Information Security for Howdens. So I've worked with Howdens for 4 years now. The whole of my career has been in the sort of cybersecurity space for the sort of past 20 years.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So yes, hi everyone. I'm Puneet, part of BP for last 10 years. I head up our application security and GRC platforms service lines, and really happy to be part of this panel and looking forward for the next 45 minutes.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, guys. So we haven't got a huge amount of slideware to talk through for this one. So this is meant to be just a talking session to really understand how we go about unlocking that kind of cybersecurity spend and what we do with that kind of messaging, and how we bring people both externally and internally into that sort of vein of topics. So to start with hopefully an easy question for both of you. First of all, do you have a specific cybersecurity budget that you have control of? And can you talk to me a little bit about how that kind of works within your different organizations? And if I could start with Paul again, just to see how that works in the Howdens area.
No problem. And the way our budgeting has changed as we've progressed. So when I first started with Howdens, we had a sort of security tooling budget, and I had a responsibility both for the technical tools and for the sort of security governance. More recently, we've changed that. So my responsibility and my budgeting is more around the governance and assurance. The one thing I found is, as we've sort of developed, a lot of the security spend is within the projects and it's within other areas of the business. So a lot of my role is supporting them in making good choices around their spend in security. And then I do have that funding as well to support some of the initiatives and to get that assurance that we're doing the right thing as well. So the main thing is it's almost outside of my control, but I influence those budgets.
Fantastic. Really good to hear. And Punit, I know BP is not quite the same as Howdens, but how does it work in the BP world?
Yeah, so in terms of the budgets, all the various service lines within the security organization have got their budgets. And as like Paul said, most of it is to deliver security as part of the projects, which the first line of the businesses are enabling. But there are a lot of security tooling or continuous sort of controls monitoring or SecOps kind of projects, which we initiate as part of our second line assurance work to make sure that the assets are secure and data protection and all the other sort of control points are met. So yes, we personally speaking, I do hold budget to sort of enable that, and so would my peers in the other domains. And then yes, our main objective is how do we sort of provide value to our customers in the businesses, because ultimately we are trying to secure the assets which they own and operate, right? So the fundamental benefit realization case always is that what does the customer need? Is he or she understanding the value of building in the right controls right from the scratch, word go, and then we sort of enable that with our expertise.
Super. So two kind of similar but different answers there, if I may. You've got somebody with Punit and yourself with BP where you actually have got command over some budget, and you're talking about trying to quantify and understand where to put it and how to build that consensus. And Paul, it seems like you're as much an advisor and an influencer as opposed to just controlling discretionary spend within that area. But the common themes there, if I may, it seems to be picking up on trying to encourage people outside of your direct control to understand the nature of the problem. So if I may, how do you guys achieve that? How do you go out to those people who don't see security as their fundamental need, but recognizing the importance of it?
No problem. And from my side, certainly it goes back to the old BT saying, it's good to talk. So the one thing that we've really changed is building up really good relationships with the senior stakeholders in the business. So the one thing, we have a really good sort of communication channel to understand a bit about what the business needs. I think the days of needing to worry them about cybersecurity are gone. That fear is already there. So one of the things is trying to give them some assurance that we've got the controls in place, and making sure that they're aware of the efforts that are going on within the teams and are brought on side of that. And that's a lot about what I do. I generally find if you speak to the right people, they're very supportive of cybersecurity, and the understanding has really changed from the early days back in the 2000s when you used to have to frighten people about theoretical risk to talking about things that are on the sort of BBC headlines nowadays. So it's all about, for me, it's all about building, my role's really changed into building really good relationships rather than building technology as such.
Fantastic. Poonit, anything to add on that front?
Yeah, so I would add on to what Paul said, because that's all the wisdom we also sort of consume and try to propagate. I think in our case, because of the length and breadth of the organization, I think you need a couple of, an army of people to sort of propagate that change across multiple business lines and multiple segments. Like, so we used to have traditionally upstream, downstream, and trading. Now we call it production and operations, gas and low carbon, and there's a whole new structure, right? So to influence change and get that mindset of cyber first or cybersecurity as a key risk. What has worked for us in the last couple of years is that we have got a business information security sort of function, which is embedded as part of the businesses. Their job is to align what the businesses are doing from a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10-year plans, and sort of to embed the right security culture and getting visibility of all of that investment and big programs, and to bring all of that back to more of the operational teams or the SecOps sort of teams to say, guys, this is what is happening. How can we be involved? So that makes the conversation a bit easier rather than we trying to land that conversation directly with a business unit leader or the CEO of a particular segment. So I think that has worked quite well for us.
Super. I just want to pick up on that point there that you made, Poonit, about it's more about culture and having that security mindset throughout the organization rather than it's a discrete piece of technology or product. Which do you think is easier to achieve?
Yeah, I think instilling culture in an organization, and that is not only limited to security, but we regard safety as the number one priority, and security sort of sits right at the top. And we always say doing the right thing or doing safe business safely is a good business to be in, right? So from that perspective, having that culture in the organization is really important to us. And I think in the last couple of years, we have taken massive strides in that. Of course, the environment externally to us is also helping to raise the awareness of this whole thing. But still, within the organization, I think the trust is always built inside out. So you can't go externally to the market and say, we are doing all the right things and believe us. I think our employees and our partners and our contractors also have to trust what we are doing. So from that perspective, instilling that culture is really important. And we have taken some steps. And I also a big believer of you can't influence something which you can't measure, right? So you got to measure the changes which you are putting in with some sort of matrices, right? And having those KPIs, and you are going back to your people to say, this is what we achieved in the last quarter. This is what we are going to do the next one. And you can see a trending line up, down, whatever that is. So I think that really gamifies the whole conversation as to how are we doing as an organization on cybersecurity? How is the culture? So we have taken some steps, and I think it's all going in the right direction. But yes, it's a case of how fast can we do it, and are we resilient enough or not? Because yes, I think that's a challenge across the industry. But yes, to your point, culture piece is really important to us.
Yeah, very true. And you picked up on something that I love to hear about trying to gamify security, trying to make sure that you've got something a little bit more tangible from the subjectivity of are we secure? And I mean, Turnkey has been working on that particular model for a long time, and we've actually got some really good progress there, but it's not a sales pitch at the moment to talk about that. But if anybody wants to hear about it, talk to me afterwards. But again, picking up on that point, Paul, I know that when we were talking before, you were very passionate about giving credit to the security function and sort of recognizing what they're doing and trying to present that it's not a terrible picture to the board every time. We have got some things that are going through and are working correctly. I wonder if you can just explain that a little bit more and see, how do you give credit to your existing security initiatives, and how do you track and monitor that they are actually delivering what you hope?
No problem. So the main approach we take, so one of the things we have done is really focused around building out what we call our foundation controls. So identifying those key controls we must have in place and how we measure those. So there's obvious things like your patching, your antivirus, keeping systems up to date, etc. Another really important of my role is, more recently, I've been spending a lot of time speaking with some of the exec in helping them understand cybersecurity and some of the good work that's happening in the background, to give them the reassurance that some of the changes they're seeing coming through really help the business. It's also talking to the business about some of how we can start to build confidence in our products through security. So when we talk about how do we sell security to our customers, so for us, we've invested quite heavily in a digital platform for our builders to allow them to log in and pay bills. And one thing we can look at is actually, can we measure how much security a builder is expecting? Before we would talk about, let's make it as easy as possible for them to log in. As an example, username and passwords, but actually they're now starting to look for things like multi-factor authentication. Can we provide them these additional assurances that when they're logging into our system, they're getting the security they want? And key for me as well, we've been doing a lot about, we talked earlier about the culture, and that's an area I've been picking up on. So we're doing a lot of town halls, and one of the things that's been really successful for us is relating security, not just in the office, but at home as well. So when we talk about phishing, we use a lot of examples of the sort of phishing you would get at home, as well as some of the things we'd see in the office. So one thing we do with our town halls and our presentations is often start around this sort of personal view. These are things that when you're at home, you should be really looking out for and be aware of. And then actually, let's see how that comes into the office. Let's see how you can protect yourself in the office. And I found that really sort of wins minds. And actually, people want to talk about the stuff they read in the news. They want to talk about the oil pipelines in America, etc., stuff they've read about. And how does that relate to us as a business as well? And it's about reassuring them rather than frightening them about it, which is certainly the old-fashioned way of getting the story across.
Absolutely. So I just want to pause there, because we've had a couple of questions coming into the Q&A from the audience as well. So we'll pick up on some of those, but I did want to draw people's attention to the fact that we've got a couple of poll questions out there as well. So just as you're listening to the goldmine of information coming from Paul and from Punit, please do have a rant at the screen and answer the poll questions as well. We may well pick up on some of those findings later on in the day. But just a couple of quick questions from the group. We've had one for Paul, particularly around your project spend and seeing whether the projects are actually delivering to what they ought to be. And picking up on your last point as well, is that how can you ensure that the security agenda is not dropped from those projects in favor of what would be a functional requirement? So I know in Turnkey, we talk about security as the core requirement, and it's not just an add-on or a non-functional requirement. Again, it sounds like you're exactly the same with your builder portal as well. So how do you safeguard that security is still continued to be top of mind throughout the project delivery streams?
And it's always a challenge with any project, and it certainly used to be more of a challenge in the past. I think the key thing is avoiding it dropping out of your minimum viable product, is that phrase that's quite often used as we get towards deadlines. So it's making sure that the security remains as a phase one of the project, or the MVP, if you like. So the key way we deliver that is through making sure within my team, when we support the project teams, we do a security assessment with them. We identify those controls up front, the areas we want to focus on, and we work with them throughout the project. The one thing that's really changed as well, and something we've seen within our organisation, is the support from the top. a really good example with our last sort of go live for our builder portal. One of the key meetings towards the end, Andrew, our CEO, called a meeting together to get assurance from the project team that all of this security assessment had been completed, and wanted to run through that detail. And it was a bit of a sort of opening of the eyes to say, actually, suddenly we've got somebody who's actually called a meeting, not to say, is it going live, but to ask that question, are we happy for it to go live? Have we got the sign-off from the security team? And it just sort of shows that support, because actually, yeah, we do need to get this stuff out there. But I think certainly if you speak to the right people at the right level, they will support you to make sure that the security is in there.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And Poonit, I'd imagine it's a similar sort of story for you as well, trying to make sure that those security requirements are carried through, not just on a best endeavors basis, but as an absolute core mandatory requirement.
Yeah, it is. And I think life is about prioritization. You can do only, what resources you have. And the reality is that a lot of these projects would either come at the last minute with the best endeavors they had, but so we use some sort of prioritization, right? So the assets which have got high confidentiality, integrity, availability rating, of course, they need to have the full suite of controls, the foundational as well as the overall controls embedded in them. But then we do have a tiering approach that not all projects can go through the pipeline which we have, because we have limited resources, right? So I think prioritization is also important, but I do believe that the support from the businesses in doing the right thing is always there. It's a case of, do you want to go live with that, MVP with all the right security controls inbuilt on day one? And if it's going live for the business, yes, you would do that. But if it's a technical go live, you can sort of, prioritize certain things there. So it's a case of trying to understand what is the business requirement and how do you support them.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Now, the next question that we've got is almost nicely segued in from that business requirement side of things. It's from Anthony, and he's asked the question of, despite every organization being slightly different, it'd be really good to hear where you actually start when requesting budget. So how do you have that conversation, and who do you have that with when you want to get that investment from a security spend perspective? So who wants to go first on that particular one?
I can go. Yeah.
Thanks,
So I think, in terms of the investment cycle, we traditionally, have like investments sort of carried forward, and then we have multiple programs going on, right, which would have a repeat OPEX and CAPEX requirements as we go forward, and likewise. But then in case of anything new initiative, right, or any data which needs to be asked, it always starts with a risk conversation as to what is the risk we are trying to mitigate here. And that has to be a business conversation. It cannot be a cybersecurity owned and operated, conversation, because we might think that solving that particular problem or applying that level of cool technology or controls is the right thing to do. But then the business has to come to the table and say, this what matters to me. And if you prioritize this one, that would make more sense. So our investments are pretty much driven by the risks we see. And for that, we have a pretty robust risk management practices in place. There are reviews which would happen at all the levels, right from the execs right down to the individual asset owner level. And an aggregation of that sort of feeds in to our overall cycle, and our strategy and architecture team sort of leads that conversation. And then we would give our inputs from a service perspective to say, in the AppSec or in the platform space, this is what we see, right? And it's a mix of, I would say the prioritization mainly happens from a risk perspective, because the money always has to flow wherein we are trying to mitigate the maximum risk. But in some cases, we continuously sort of learn and experiment and, try out the technologies which are available from all of the cloud vendors or other platforms sort of coming forward. So yes, there's always an element of, yes, we would like to try these new sort of platforms, because that would just accelerate the way we do certain things, right? And again, third piece is regulatory requirements. So you can't just sort of ignore our dear friends in audit and legal and reg space. So if there's a requirement coming from that side, of course, that would just bring some of these tasks up in the priority. So yes, it's a mix of those couple of things which would drive our investment cycle.
Fantastic. And Paul, same question to you.
Yeah, no problem. So from my perspective, so key for me is if you're looking to invest, it must, certainly within our organisation, what we're looking at is around the security policy that we've set and those foundation controls that we're developing. How can an investment support those in moving our position forwards? Slightly off topic, but it does come back to this. One conversation we had recently with someone senior in the business is we've identified that the cyber risk profile for our business, it's not reducing. So how do we get it reducing? And the key for us is that, and certainly in our sort of area at the moment, that the outside threats appear to be increasing with the risk of ransomware, etc. So for us, the story is that we have to keep moving to stand still. And that's part of the challenge that we have as a team. We need to continually develop our controls and develop the methods in which we protect our business and our customers in order to maintain the level of risk that we hold. And that's quite clear. The other thing I always take into consideration, because certainly in my position, in the way that we work, I quite often get called into we're looking to put this proposal forwards. Could you support this? It's making sure that anything that's put forward to improve your cybersecurity is fully delivered. So that, because quite often it's a part of a project. So whether you're upgrading your network and implementing some new security controls as part of that upgrade, it's making sure that that is included and that is something that is part of that delivery of that project, so that it does improve afterwards. It's going back to the earlier question around how do you stop things being deprioritized. It's making sure that, yes, you're supporting that project in going through, because I think the one thing we're finding, and certainly in most organizations now, if you talk security to the senior team, there's a lot of support. There's almost a fear to say no. So it's just making sure that you are making a good decision, making sure you have absolutely confidence in what's being put forwards and the confidence that it will be delivered, and that at the end of it, that project will deliver the security controls that you're looking for.
Yeah, hugely important, of course. Anthony, I hope that answered your question, at least in part. If it didn't, please feel free to redraft and put another one in where we'll have another go. But yeah, some really good insights there, and I think there's a few things that we can pick up on across what you said. Then we can have another podcast or another 2-hour session on whatever we do from promote those sorts of things. So I think one of the things that you've both kind of talked about many times is the business. And we often see that the business is a great big veil that somebody hides behind when they don't want to spend the money or they don't want to do anything. So have you got any insights as to how you sort of pull back that veil, that curtain, and actually quantify who in the business is the person or the people that need to be engaged with? I don't know, Paul, you've certainly mentioned that to us a couple of times, that you try and substantiate it back to an individual or something. But if you could let us know your tactics for that would be really helpful.
Yeah, no problem. I think it's quite often, and one of the challenges, a lot of the sort of security controls are within the technology teams. And it's something in many of the organisations I've worked in, one of the sort of bounce back against controls is, well, actually, I don't think the business would like this. And the one thing I would say is that's where building this culture and building these relationships to support those changes. It may be that somebody within the business has said, actually, I can't support that activity. But there's a couple of things there. Is it somebody in the business making that decision, or is there an assumption that is the view of the business? And equally so, did the business actually understand what it is they're pushing back on? So the one thing, and the one thing we've got really good in Howdens is a really good culture of talking. So everybody within the senior team is very approachable. So we're able to have those conversations. I remember quite early in my time at Howdens, we had an issue where we needed to update something due to a potential vulnerability on a website. And I was told we weren't supported by the business to do the work. When I spoke to the person, they assumed it was functionality we were looking to improve. So there was pushback from them because they were very busy in that department. However, once we walked through it at 11 in the morning, all the patching was done by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because they realised the importance of what we're trying to do. So I think it's really important to, and that's one of the other aspects of this, is something that we've talked about at Howdens, and I've talked with the exec and at the board as well. We always used to try and make security completely transparent, and that was the target. You shouldn't see security, it should just be there in the background. And that's something we've really pushed aside to say, actually, security shouldn't be transparent, it should be visible and it should be appropriate. And that's the challenge, what's appropriate. And a great example of that is things like authentication. You'll find nowadays, if you start pushing stronger authentication, it improves your customers' confidence in your product and they're more likely to use it. Whereas there was that concern that the business wouldn't like that because it's making the customer journey more difficult. So it's worth trying to break some of those barriers down. And part of my role at times is also to support the teams in having some of those conversations to help people understand what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Yeah, completely agree. And again, Punit, with the sprawling nature of BP's business, as you say, you've changed from a divisional based approach to more business unit centric. And do you have the same sort of challenges there, where you've got people hiding behind the business as a catch-all term, but not really understanding who to talk to and when?
Yeah. So in our case, what we did was, I think we created digital organizations, right, facing off to the businesses. So all the digital spend is now housed in those digital 5, as we call them, and digital security is one of them. So digital security has got a table right at the business now. So it's not a case of digital security going to the IT organization and then IT talking to the finance organization to get some budgets and, trying to talk to the real business to get some engagement. The driver is there, and the change we have made in the last sort of round of reinventing BP was to ensure that digital gets a priority at a business level, right? So BP's ambition is to digitize the business, and we all know that every business has to be a digital business, right? And it's no longer a case that businesses can say that we have an IT budget and it's a cost center, right? IT or the technology or digital, whatever the names have changed in the last so many years, right? That is really becoming an enabler for all the businesses. And if we won't change, someone else would come up and just sort of destroy, right, or overstep our sort of businesses. So from that perspective, it's not a difficult conversation to say that if we have to really innovate fast, go forward with the digital initiatives, securing those platforms, securing those business processes, and allowing people to transact safely and securely, and to establish the trust of that business with their customers. Why do we need digital security and all the right controls in there, right? So in my opinion, there's a fundamental shift in the last 2 years or so in the way these conversations have happened. And I would continue to see a massive change, right? Wherein we don't have to go with massive sort of PowerPoints and, to give all of that shabam around that. I think the business also starts to understand, why do we need this? Again, I would repeat myself, it's a case of prioritization because there's so much to do, right? So how do you come back to that?
Fantastic. And that leads really nicely into the next question that we had from the audience there. And it was directed to you, Pune, and to me, strangely enough. So I'll get my little bit in as well. So it says, we've mentioned the use of KPIs to help in justifying and prioritizing some of that security spend. Can you give us an example of the kinds of KPIs that we measure or that we use?
Yeah. So in terms of KPIs, right? So they would differ from, are you measuring the behaviors of all the employees across the company, or are you looking at your services, major services, in terms of their control maturity, or you're just looking at your technical platforms and how secure are they from a NIST framework perspective, or all the traditional sort of control points we have. So I can give an example, right? So from a behavior perspective, some of the KPIs we use are how many people have mandatorily finished their cyber behaviors training, right? So we sort of mandate all of our employees as well as contractors to go through a mandatory cybersecurity training, which we have developed in-house. So that's one of the KPIs which we measure. Other KPIs are like how many people are actually entering their BP credentials onto external websites, right? Because that would tell us that people are not understanding how to use their logins and keeping their passwords safe and all of that, so, right? So all of these basic cyber hygiene kind of controls from an end user perspective, we have sort of created a sort of cyber behavior and education program, and we sort of have KPIs around these, which we measure and we publish it to the whole business, and that has been a great success. We have actually made it data driven, sort of to a great extent, and different businesses are now sort of comparing that, okay, our score is this much and the finance is at that score, right? So that gamification has also come because you can show to people what they are doing, and then every line manager or every sort of senior level leader out there has to make sure that their people are doing the right thing. And if there is a reason why they cannot, you can drill down and see at which KPI you are lagging behind, and you can improve your score by taking some corrective action. So it really goes to show that the company is proactive, people understand what the risks are, they can see how they are performing month on month and can see a trend line. And I think it just goes to show how much value we sort of pertain to that process. So that's just one of the examples wherein, yeah, we use that for our success criteria.
Fantastic. And I think the key thing there is you're saying that you're almost presenting that business value statement through the lens of the risks that you're managing, trying to show exactly as Paul mentioned earlier, trying to show that the risk universe might be shifting and our responses have to continue to shift in order to retain that same level of control. And so that way you're actually starting to quantify the business drivers and the business cases and justifying, whilst also giving credit for what the security function is providing. And I think that's really a lot of the times the missing link that we see in terms of securing security spend, because it's subjective. It's like, well, how do you know when it's enough? But by using some of those measures that Poonat's just explained and presenting it in that risk-based lens that Paul was mentioning, that's really what it is, isn't it? You're justifying the spend in those sorts of ways. I suppose because that question name checked me, if you'll indulge me for a second, I want to try and give how we're trying to take those KPIs forward. We use very similar data sets and data points that you've been talking about, Poonat. But what we try and look for is the outcomes, the outcome-based measures. So, for example, correlating number of people who have done their mandatory cyber awareness training or security awareness training. What should that mean? Well, that should correlate to a reduction in phishing success stories, or it should reduce the number of vulnerabilities that are discovered, or it should reduce the malware or ransomware likelihood. So we look at some of those indicators by correlating that with security incident and event monitoring. So using those things to sort of look at see whether there's any incidents that are coming through, looking to see whether there are an increase in perhaps false positives in terms of phishing emails reported. So it doesn't necessarily correlate that it's a different attack, but we're looking for a change in behaviors. We're looking for the outcomes. Going back to some of the security project-based requirements, how many times do we see that the authorizations in the security side of things are more often not the biggest ticket raisers at the point of go live? Well, it stands to reason, because the first time a user would actually log in, that's when they say, oh, I can't do what I meant to do. Everything's blamed as an authorization problem when it really very often isn't. But if you're looking at, on the one side, how much does it cost you to do those security assessments and the secure by design that Paul was looking at, versus the correlation of incidents that you get on a project go live that are tagged as security issues, you can start seeing, well, there's value in spending more time doing the upfront assessments because it reduces the impact on the support teams at go live. Some of those sorts of measures to quantify and exactly as you said, gamify. Paul, is there anything else you wanted to kind of chip in onto this?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, so we do a similar, we do dashboarding and that to look at risk. I think the key thing and the key story when you're sort of putting that data is, and certainly it's thinking about the audience you're presenting that back to and what it is you're wanting them to do with that information. Are you telling them that things are bad? Are you looking for support from them to make change? The one challenge as well is making sure that anything you do present has has the people can understand it. So, for example, if you were looking at vulnerabilities on a network, is 1,000 bad? Is that good? What's the trending over time? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Because if you said to someone, here's 1,000 issues, oh crikey, that's terrible. Well, actually, we've got 20,000 endpoints. So actually, we've got one new patch that's come out. So there's something that's going on. So it's thinking about what data you can present, the value it can add, and the expectation from presenting that data as well is really important. Because something we used to do a lot of back in the day was things like how many emails we've received, how many emails have been blocked for spam. Actually, it's not much use, it's been dealt with. So it's looking at how you can present data that people can make a good decision with, and whoever you're presenting, it's helping them understand what your ask is from them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what you've both mentioned is the importance of understanding your asset register, understanding the criticality of what it is that you're managing, because that then bases the services that you're offering and allows you to make an informed risk decision as to whether that vulnerability is tolerated because it's not very critical, or whether it's mandatory, got to be upgraded in the position of the builders portals or that front-facing customer portal for orders. That would have a very different risk appetite and threshold. So trying to make sure that you've got that joined up view of the truth is hugely important in context.
Yeah, sorry. And the less you assess, the less you find, and that's not a good picture. And that's the other thing to share with the team. So it's finding that appropriateness as well.
That's it. And unfortunately, in the current political climate, the more you test, the more you find, which gives a worse result in some cases from a pandemic point of view. But hey, that's a whole different subject matter, isn't it? So we have had another question that's come in. So this one I'm sure is close to your heart. So I've certainly got an opinion on it, but I'll let your opinions drive. Do we see cyber insurance as a reasonable mitigation for the risk when it's sort of driving priorities? So how much credit do you put by cyber risk insurance?
Do you want me to start?
Please.
Yeah. I mean, certainly for me, I do see the value in it. As a business, we have insured for cybersecurity incidents. The approach we take as a business is we insure against our key risks, and cybersecurity is right up there. It's not the be all and end all. One thing, I was talking to somebody recently on this topic, and one of the things we debated was, would you rather spend the money on controls or insurance? But as a business, when you relate it to other areas of our business, we have insurance for our factories if we were to have an incident or a fire, and we should have insurance for our systems if we were to have an incident or a fire, to make sure we have the right level of coverage. It's certainly something that's worth looking at. It's an expectation of our shareholders that we are managing our risk in the most appropriate way, which includes we're insuring against what we can. So yeah, I do see it as an important tool. One little tip for insurance, if you do take it out, really one thing we've done a lot of work with is work with insurers to understand how we can use it, because you can get a lot of value from working with your insurance company to both reduce the premium, but also understand the services and be able to engage with them if you do need them as well, rather than wait until after the fact.
Absolutely. I'm just conscious of time, but Poonit, I'd like to hear your view on cyber risk insurance.
Yeah, so I mean, frankly speaking, I won't be able to comment on that topic right in this audience, but yeah, insurance is a necessary evil. I think you would only realize the value of insurance when it, the risk materializes. So from that perspective, yes, it's a topic which every board across the globe is sort of grappling with. Should we raise the insurance? Should we include more clauses? And yeah, as Paul said, do we really know when it happens? How do you start to, understand what do you get? What are the timelines? Is it in or out? So yes, I'm sure it's a topic which legal teams are pretty much on. And again, I won't be able to divulge any more details on that. Yeah.
So for me, just to kind of bring that one to a close, I think Paul's exactly right. Use it in the right instances where you know that you can have insurable items that are covered for the right purposes. The biggest got you for me is that a lot of these policies are very, very weak when it comes to exactly what they will pay out, what they won't, how they will help you, and what they won't do. There's a huge amount of exclusions depending on whether it's an act of war, whether it's a state-sponsored attack, in which case that's not insured, all of those kinds of things. And when we see the rise of cyber threat intelligence and the CTI industry, understanding your risks, understanding your exposures and your gaps, and seeing whether that is an insurable element is really, really vital. There are a lot of ambulance chasers out there in the cyber insurance world, and quite a lot of the time it may sound like you've got amazing coverage and you've actually got absolutely nothing. So yeah, it's definitely a watch point on that front. Guys, I'm really sorry we're in the last 5 minutes, could you believe? But I think what I'd like to do really is try and move us into a summing up position to make sure that we kind of close this discussion out in the right way. So a more difficult question for you, but if you could summarize your top 3 tips for somebody who needs to get SAP security, not SAP security, or cybersecurity, application security, whatever that you need, anything in that realm. If you can have your top 3 tips as to what you would do or how you would help somebody listening to this, what would they be? And again, Paul, if you wouldn't mind starting, that would be fantastic.
No problem. Whether I can do 3 exactly, but key for me is it's good to talk and go back to my BT quote. But build that relationship with the business to understand and work with them to help them understand what it is you're looking to invest in and why you're investing. That would be the first one. The next one would certainly be understand the investment that you're making. So whether that be out of your budget or whether that be out of another budget, make sure that it does deliver against what you're looking to deliver and puts those controls in place. You don't get any security from a control you've bought, but yet not implemented. So I think that those are the two areas, and then actually that then shows the value of the investment if it's been fully implemented. And sing about it afterwards, that'd be the third. So talk about the teams, explain to the senior teams the benefits of what some of the other teams have put in place and how that will help them in ensuring that they have a secure environment to support their customers.
Fantastic. And Punit, same thing to you. Your top tips for security investment.
My top 3 would be, first of all, understand your environment and understand your assets. That's in many cases a blind spot. We don't know what we are after, right? So having that clearly articulated and understood is very important. Once you understand your assets and everything which you're after, prioritize, because you can't go after everything in one go. So you have to definitely prioritize. And then most important, partnerships, right? You have to show value to the business because people keep coming back to you because you deliver value. And that's the biggest challenge with the internal cybersecurity teams, that because they are not able to deliver value, people often go out and start to sort of say, oh, you know what, I saw some cool sort of thing there. So you have to deliver value, quick sort of value in partnership with the business. And that can only happen if you have the trust from them. So again, just summing up all the conversations we had, those are the top 3 tips I would have for everyone who is sort of into this space.
Fantastic. So all that really remains is to say thank you very much, Paul and Punit. Your expertise has come through very, very transparently, unlike security, which needs to be visible. So just a great thank you from you for everything that you've done for this session. I have no doubt that everybody listening will have found significant value from it, and hopefully we'll get on to building some greater and bigger security spends in the very near future. But from everyone at Turnkey, massive thank you and appreciation to you two for your time today. And hopefully there'll be more greater sessions to come.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Paul. Yeah.